First of all, I apologize for the audio. I can't seem to get it adjusted well enough. Second, this video is for beginners. What we're going to do is I have two monitors that I use on my desktop computer, and I like to, when I watch videos on my big screen or TV on my big screen, I like to black out the other screen rather than turn it off. So if you want to learn how to set this up to do that, then stick by me and we'll go through it. But just remember, this is going to be slow because it's for beginners. So let's get started. So we want a new project, and since I already have a Blackout, I'm going to call it Blackout 2. And I unchecked these boxes because I don't want multiple folders. So when you do that, it creates the framework for a new project, puts a form in there for you, and creates some code. The first thing I like to do on this particular one is set up the text on it. I'm going to call this Blackout, and then I want to go down and set up my window state to maximized. So when this opens, I want it to be maximized. The second thing I want to do is add a couple of labels over here in the toolbox. Go grab a label, drop it on, about right there. It doesn't matter, we'll set the position in code, and then we'll drop another label right here. So I want to click that label, and I want to set up the font on that label. The default is Microsoft Sans Serif, but I like Tahoma. You can set it to whatever you want, and I'm going to set it to bold and 16 for the size. Okay, and then the other one, I want to do the same thing, except I still want Tahoma, but I'm going to leave it regular and size 12. And you'll see why a little later on. So then I want to go to the toolbox and drop a timer control on here. You notice when it drops a timer control, it puts it down here. So the first thing I want to do is you want to double click the form, not on top of the labels but out here in the clear. Double click it, and it creates a method stub for you. Then we'll get back to that later. And then I want to go down to this timer and double click it, and it creates a method stub for that. So now we don't need all of these using statements. We're not going to be using a lot of this, so I want to get rid of this, just get rid of those, and all of those. So those are the only three we need. It requires less memory if you get rid of those. Okay, so what we're interested in is mouse events, and what we'll need to create is some mouse event handlers, and I've already got them created for the form, and this is where you want to put them because this is where it initializes and sets everything up before anything else. So I want to drop these. I already have this in another screen. Like I said, I have another monitor and I have that open, and I want to paste that in there. So this is the form 1. When C#, if you're used to VB just says form 1, but in C# it says this, and that means form 1, whatever form you're on. And this is what we're setting up. The event handler is mouse enter. So when the mouse enters the form, there, my mouse just entered the form. I went off to my other screen, and boom, my mouse entered the form. You notice it has some behavior in Visual Studio where you enter the area and it changes the mouse. Well, that's what we're doing. So you notice there's squiggly lines here. What you want to do is click inside the parentheses, move your mouse down and then back up, and you'll have this little tab that stubs down. Click on the down arrow, and we want to generate a method stub. If you're not in the parentheses, it will ask you something different, but for this we want to generate a method stub. So click that, and see here it generated the method stub for us. So let's do that for each one. Generate method stub. Click inside the parentheses, move up and down, and then generate method stub. Okay, so now we have our method stubs all done for us, and first thing I want to do is get rid of this generated code. We don't need it. Okay, so for the double click, what I want to do is be able to double click on the form and close the form. That just makes it handy for me. So I already have that. It's a real simple statement. It's just this dot close. So close is a built-in method. And let's paste that in there. So all we're doing is saying form 1 close, and it closes the application for you. Now when we click on the form, what I want to do there is I want to get rid of this control box. This part up here is called a control box. Very top, it's like a header on all forms. So I want to get rid of that when I click the form. So the way you do that is you say this dot control box equal false, and the other thing you want to do is you want to change the border style. The border is very tiny little edge you can see around it, so we don't want a border there at all, so we change it to none. So yeah, that's what happens when we click the form. Now when the mouse leaves the form, in other words, I'm leaving the form right now, bang, you see the mouse just left the edit area, and it changed in this particular application. They have it set up. So when we do a mouse leave, we want to just make the form go black. That's simply what we're going to do. And the way you set colors in C#, the form, back color equals color dot black. So we're setting the back color to black. Okay, moving along. So when we enter the form, you notice how the mouse here turns into an eye, or like a bar, when we enter the edit area. So what we want to do when we enter our form is we want the back color to be white so that we can see everything. So we want to do a couple of other things too, because when we left the form we changed a couple of things as well. So like I said, the control box, see, we've set it to false when we click it up here, but now when we're coming back in we want to set it to true. So we want a control box when we come back in. Again, that's this area up here. If you set it to false, this disappears. It's like creating a full screen effect when you get rid of that. So, and then we set the color to white, and we change the border style to fixed single. That's what this one is, fixed single. So now when we enter the form, oops, put that in the wrong place, didn't I? That's what we want to do when we enter the form. Okay. So, sorry about that. So now, let's just see what happens when we do that. We'll just run this like it is. We're not done yet, but let's run it like it is to see what happens. Okay. I'm leaving. Oh, it went black. And how about that? Now watch what happens when I click. I see the header disappeared, and it's like full screen black now. Coming back in, leaving, coming back in, clicking, got rid of the header, left, came back in, it brought it back, see? So now when we double click, you remember that was to close it. I'm going to double click now. Okay, so that closed the form. So that's the code that we put in already. So we still have some work to do. So let's do something with this timer. What we want to do, well, I tell you what, let's do the form load first, because there's some code that needs to be set for the timer there. So let's do form load, and we'll set up the timer, copying it from my other one, and paste. So the interval, as you can see, it sets the time in milliseconds. So actually that's not what I want there. What I want there is 1000, and I'll just get rid of that one. So we set it to 1000 milliseconds, which means that we've just set it to do an interval every second. So every second, that's the timer tick. And every second it will go run the code in this timer 1 tick method. C# already knows how to do that. The next thing we need to do is enable it. Make sure you put this line in here, timer 1 enabled. And that starts it to running. You set it to true. Then we're going to create a variable here. I call it capital CRLF. And that brings us to the backslash stuff in C#. You can't put just a backslash in C#, because you have to do escape codes for certain characters. And this is a string type variable that we're creating, and we put \n\r. So let's jump over to this, and as you can see, \n, this is escape sequences, and \n is for a new line, and \r is a carriage return. So you want both of those. You want a new line and you want a carriage return. So let's jump back over to our program here. So now we're putting those into this variable. And now whenever we want a carriage return line feed, all we do is place this variable in our text. So let's create a new variable, and I call it txt instructions. It's another string variable. And see how I've added this variable to that? So what I'm telling it to do is give me 2 carriage return line feeds after this. Okay, the next line here is another variable. I just call it dToday for date today, and it's a date type structure. So we're saying date time now, so that's today, day of week, which in this particular case it's Friday. And since it's a date type, then we need to convert it to string because this is a string variable. So we're putting Friday into the string variable dToday here. And like I said, this variable we've created, we've put this text in there along with these escape sequences. When you put the plus sign, it means just add this to this. And here, see this plus equals? What we're saying here is, okay, what's already in this, add this to it, and so on and so forth. So we're adding each line, and the reason I do this is so that it doesn't just keep stretching out and stretching out, stretching out. It just kind of makes it a little more readable. So we're adding all of this text you see in red to this text instruction. By the time you get down to here, every bit of this has been placed into this variable. Now, let's set, this says Friday, right? Because it's Friday here. I said date time now, day of week, and that's today because it's now. We're setting that the text into the text of the label. So it's a string variable, so it will go right into the text of the label. And then plus a comma and a space. So this will read Friday, comma, space, and then plus date time dot now to string. And again, it's a date type here. It won't go into a string variable unless you are a text type until you convert it to string. So if you put all this together, it says Friday, comma, space, today's date and today's time. Then on label 2, we're putting all of this text that we've placed into text instructions. We're placing that in label 2. The next line here is positioning label 2. Remember I told you that we would position it later? This code positions label 2. And what this does, left is the left side of label 2. So what this is doing is placing the left side of label 2, and this is the form, and this is the width of the form, divided by 2. We're doing math here. So we don't have to know what the width is. We're just saying the form width, whatever it is, divided by 2 minus Again, we don't have to know what size the label is because we're just saying. Okay, like I said, we don't have to know the width of label 2, but we are dividing that by 2. And we're putting that, we're telling the label 2 to position its left side to this mathematical expression. And what that does, it places it horizontally right in the center. So when you see something like this, it's centering horizontally when you use left. So now we're going to go to the top of label 2. So this is where we want the top of label 2. The form height divided by 2 minus the label height divided by 2. And this places label 2 centered vertically. And again, we're doing the same thing with label 1 horizontally. We're placing it in the center. Form and label 1. Now, the top of label 1, we want it to be 150 pixels above the top of label 2. We've already centered it, and now we're doing a vertical. In Visual Studio, you count from the top down. So the top is 0, and as further you go down, the count goes up for the number, the location in pixels. So we want to move it up, so we go in the minus direction from label 2. Okay, so we have that all set up, and you remember here where we set D today as the day of week, which is here is Friday. We want to do that again in the timer tick, and basically these variables are local. So if I put it down here, it's not the same variable because it's in a different method. So this variable is not the same as that variable. They're not located in the same place in memory. They're not identical. But we just made them equal to the same thing. So when it comes down here, we're going to put the day of the week into the string variable to today. And the other thing we want to do when the timer ticks is we want to put that, the same thing we did on the other one, here. We want to put this into the label. So let's just copy that down here. The reason we do it in two places is because this happens when the form loads. So we want to go ahead and put it in when the form loads because we don't know if it has ticked yet. We don't know how we've caught the timing of that. So we just want to go ahead and make sure that we put that in there so that it, with labels, when you put text in a label, it automatically sizes it. So by putting this text in the label with the correct font size, it resizes it to that size. So if we didn't do that, this math wouldn't work because when we start out it's a little tiny label. So we have to put our information in it first in order to center it. Hope you understand that. I hope I explained that well enough. So let's go ahead and run this. So as you can see, it has placed the label centered, and you know, everything works like before. We're going to black out as I leave. There it goes. and then when we come back, it puts the control bar back. When I click it, the control box goes away, and we leave. We come back, it's back. That's the code we put in those methods. Now here's something you'll notice as I get over the label. Watch what happens. Oh, we just left the form and went into the label. Oh, well, we need to do something with that because it's kind of distracting, right? So if there's the other label, we went into label 1 just now, which means we left the form. Now we're going into label 2 and we left the form. So what we need to do, I'm going to double click and close this. What we need to do is we need to do the same thing that we're doing in the form whenever we enter and leave the labels. So we do that in the same place. We create event handlers, and I like to put a space between them. So we're going to do label 1. We'll do these one at a time so it's very clear to you what we're doing. So let's put this code in here, and you'll notice the squiggly lines again. So here we're doing a mouse enter for label 1 and a click for label 1 event and a double click event for label 1. You notice I didn't do a leave in label 1 because when we leave label 1, where do we go? We go onto the form, which the form has an enter. We entered the form, which does this. So it does everything we need to do because we entered the form again. We had left the form, and that's the reason it's turning black. So right here, we changed the form to black because we left the form and we went into the label. So we want to prevent that from happening, and that's the reason we're doing this. So we want our stub outs again. Same drill. We'll create our stub methods and do it the same way. Create our methods. And you make sure you click inside those parentheses, and it says generate method stub. Okay, we've done that, and we'll get rid of this as we copy in code. So on the label 1 mouse enter, what we want is to change the form to white again. We've entered the form, so it's done everything it needs to do. And what I'm going to do is just select this and paste in my code. So all I did was change the back color to white for this, because when we left, we changed it to black, right? We left the form, and the form changed it to black. So we want to make sure that it stays white. It'll be a transition that you won't even notice. So that happens very quickly. You won't notice with your eyes, but you did notice when I hovered over the label that the form turned black. So this will prevent that from happening. I'll show you here. So that's label 1, and when we leave the form going out, it turns black, right? But when we go into label 1, we're leaving the form as well, but this time, hey, it stayed white. But watch what happens when we go into label 2. Oh, it went black. Well, that's because we don't have the code set up yet for label 2. We're going to do the same thing for label 2. Now, when we click, we want to do the exact same thing as when we click in label in the form. So let's put, see, form. Okay, I'm sorry. We need to get rid of label 1 click, because we're only doing this on the form. When you click the form is when it sets the control blocks. So we just want to get rid of this. This is something we don't need. Again, my apologies. So let's just run that, and we go in here and nothing happens. It stays white. That's what we want. When we click the form, it gets rid of the control box, because that's what it says in the instructions. Left click the form in order to remove the top control box. So let's left click the form. We're not clicking this, we're left clicking the form. But actually, when you go back into that, because you left the form, went into the label, and came back out, so it changed it back to a control box. It's one of those things you just live with. At least I do. You can feel free to experiment around with that once you're done and try to sort out the logic for that. Okay, so we've gotten rid of the click, and now what we want to do the same thing for label 2 as we did for label 1. So what we'll do is we'll skip a line, paste that in there. We just copied it, and we'll paste it in there. And we just go and change everything to label 2. Okay, so now we got our little squigglies again, and you should know the drill by now to create your method stubs. Now we have our method stubs, and we just want the same thing. So in label 1 double click, we want the same thing in label 2 double click, and we want to copy it over this generated code. And for mouse enter, we want the form to be white. We don't want it to turn black. And we do that. So we've gone into label 2 and it didn't turn black. How about that? And we click and we leave and it all goes black. And we double click on the form area and it stops. And let's run that one more time and double click. Even in the label area it will stop. Label 1, same thing. Okay, well, I left you some homework. If you can figure out the logic for the click in the labels, you're a step ahead. So I hope this was useful to you, and I want to thank everyone for watching the video. See you next time.